Today with Mr. William Deary of Galesburg, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now, Mr. Deary, can you begin at the beginning? Tell us where and when you were born.
I was born in Pontiac, Michigan, and it was on July 31st, 1925.
Okay, now, did you grow up in Pontiac or did you move somewhere else?
I grew up, all my boyhood was in Pontiac.
Okay, what did your family do for a living then?
I was a landscape contractor for 50 years.
Okay, what did your father do?
My father was trained as a painter in England and was a painter contractor until the first Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that he ran a bakery truck door to door.
Okay, and how many kids were in your family?
I have 3 sisters besides myself.
All right. Okay. So during the Depression years, was it kind of just hard to make ends meet, or was there always food and that kind of thing?
Basically, yes, we had always, but it was rough.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, what kind of education did you have before you went into the service?
I was just a high school graduate.
Okay. And in what year did you finish high school?
That would have been in 43.
Okay.
December 43.
Right. So that's 2 years after Pearl Harbor. Now, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor when it happened?
Yes.
And how did you learn about it?
Well, mostly I saw it on the TV the day it happened.
Or the radio?
Yeah, I guess that would have been.
Yeah, radio then.
Radio then.
Okay. Now, at the time it happened, were you paying any attention to what was going on in the world? Because there was a war going on in Europe by then.
Yeah, I was.
And were you aware of that, or?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Now, was your father from England, or?
Yes.
Okay. So was he interested then in what was going on there?
I think so, yes. He was in World War I,
Mm-hmm.
so as a British soldier.
All right. Now, when Pearl Harbor happened, did you expect that you would have to go into the military?
No, not really. I thought the war would be over before I got old enough.
All right. Now, when we got into 43, how did you wind up entering the military? Did you get a draft notice, or did you try to enlist, or what did you do?
Well, I had taken exams for the Air Force, and then they told me I had to volunteer to be drafted,
Mm-hmm.
in which I did.
All right. Now, was there any complication involved in getting you actually enlisted?
No,
Didn't you have a health question, or?
no, not at the time.
Okay. Well, when did you first go and take the exam?
For the Air Force?
Yeah.
That would have been in probably the spring of 43.
Okay. And then after you took the exam, what happened?
Well, I had to wait till they notified me to be drafted, and it took quite a while, about almost 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And so what did you do in the meantime?
Well, I worked that summer in a GM plant working on military trucks
Mm-hmm.
that they were making, and then I went to high school in the fall.
And then did you graduate that semester?
Yes,
Okay.
in December.
All right. And then when did you get called up?
I got called up on December 11th is when I entered the service.
So like
43.
So that's the day after your final exam? Or?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, where did you report to then?
Fort Sheridan in Illinois,
Mm-hmm. And then after that, where did you go?
down to Miami Beach.
Okay. Now, was that where you had your basic training?
That's where I had my basic training as a cadet.
Okay. Now, the people who were designated cadets, what was that program for? Or what was supposed to what would happen to you there?
Well, I could have been an officer or a bombardier, co-pilot or a pilot or a navigator if my qualifications would have been right for that. But in my case, it was to be a gunner.
Now, in order to be an officer, did they expect you to have some college education already?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have been down there.
All right. So basically, the idea is they're going to recruit the officers out of that group, and then the ones who don't make it can still be air crew,
Right.
gunners, and so forth. Okay. Now, what kind of training and testing did you get when you were in Miami Beach?
We got they tested us for coordination, like they had to move pegs around, all this kind of stuff. That was one thing, and we were mentally tested with a psychologist, and so anyway, they did various things to help us to find out how our qualifications were.
Now, did they also do some of the things that happened in a regular Army basic training? Did they teach you about discipline and following orders, or give you physical training?
Yes, we had quite a bit of physical training, especially after we were notified that we were going to be gunners, and we had to wait. We had to run in the ocean, knee deep, long distances, which is really hard. And we had a lot of KP during that period of time too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what kind of facilities did they have? Where were you living?
Well, in Miami Beach, we were in St. Moritz Hotel on the probably about the 12th floor, and they had disconnected all the elevators and took all the big beds out and put cots in, and so we had a lot of our PT was running up and down those stairs.
All right. Now, about how long did that first part of it last before they separated the gunners out from the other guys?
Gee, I would say about 4 months.
Okay. Now, did you have any chance to kind of go into town, or did you get any time off during those 4 months, or were you always kind of locked in? And
Oh, we had a lot of freedom. No problem there.
mm-hmm. Now, how built up was Miami Beach in those days? I mean, were there a lot of bars and restaurants and things, or was it kind of shut down for the war?
I didn't see many restaurants close by.
Mm-hmm.
They had a mess hall made out of a tar paper shack, but most of it was hotels and residents
Mm-hmm.
in that area, and golf courses. In fact, most of our marching and parading was done on a golf course.
Mm-hmm. Now, did they have the place blacked out at night?
No, well, I don't remember that.
Well, I mean, did they have lots of lights on that you could see from outside?
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
Okay. Because the coast was supposed to be under blackout because of U-boats and things like that.
I can't recall that.
Okay. Because it sometimes took them a while to do that too. But anyway, or maybe they chased off a lot of the U-boats by then. But okay. So after that first 4 months, where did they send you next?
Laredo, Texas. That was our gunnery school. That's how we learned how to take guns blindfolded apart and put them back together again, and how to when you have to shoot at an airplane, you don't shoot you shoot if the plane's there and it's going that way, you shoot way over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so lead was getting people to know how to lead was very important, and they had several ways of training to do that. Skeet with shotgun was one, and then after we did that for a week or so, they put us on the back of a pickup with a shotgun and went around a loop where there was 20 20 places where the skeet would go off. And so we were moving probably 20, 30 miles an hour and trying to hit those skeet.
Mm-hmm.
And I did pretty good. The only thing, I got a black shoulder from the 20 rounds every time you went around that curve. That was a lot of shooting.
Right.
And they also had a big room, where the round room with drapery all hanging around it, and then in the middle was a turret with a automatic BB gun and paper airplanes going across the sky in the room, and you just shoot, and of course the material would keep the BBs from bouncing back.
Right.
But that was another way of teaching us how to lead.
Okay. Now, did they move from that to having you shoot at targets that were actually being towed by airplanes, or?
Not there.
Okay.
We did later as a crew.
All right. So this is sort of the first part of gunnery training is in Laredo,
Right.
Texas. Okay. About how long do you think you stayed there?
Probably about 3 or 4 months.
Okay. Now, was there anything to do off the base, or did you just stay on base?
Well, we were allowed to go to Mexico one day, and we had to take a kit with us just in case we had sexual problems.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the only time we could go to town in Laredo, but to go over to Mexico
Right.
was just a one-time affair.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there much to do in Laredo?
Not a great deal. It was a pretty small town then.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you get out in the boondock, everything had thorns on it. So while we were waiting to start school, they took us out into the boondocks to get plants to plant in front of our barracks, and every time we bent down, we got jabbed with thorns, and everything had thorns on it.
Okay. So were those barracks new then? Had they just built them, or?
They were built for the war, yes.
Okay. All right. So after Laredo, what do you do next?
Then we went to Lincoln, Nebraska, where we picked up our crew. We had a furlough in between, and then we was only in Lincoln about a week, and we had another furlough, and then we went to Boise, Idaho, where we trained as a crew.
All right. Now, at that point now, do you start shooting at airborne targets and things, or?
Well, we had one day that we were supposed to shoot at targets, and our plane got off the air, just off the runway, and there was a big explosion, and oil was flushing out of the engine, and so the pilot put it down on the ground as fast as he could. And they put us in a Jeep and put us in another plane, but the group that were going to the target, we never made it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we had mechanical trouble, and we had to land at a fighter base near Salt Lake City. It was 60 miles from Salt Lake City, and until they fixed our magnetos, and then we flew back. So we never did get to shoot at that target.
Okay.
The rest of the group did, but we didn't.
So what did you do the rest of the time while you're up there in Idaho?
Well, sometimes the bombardier had to know how to hit the target, and so there was circles in the desert and we flew low altitude, and I was designated as the photographer to see whether he was doing well, and so I was laying in the bomb bays with my parachute on, and with this big camera, taking pictures when he dropped the bombs, and everything was going fine, except then we hit an air pocket, and I went up and almost went out of that bomb bay. I was very close to staying in that plane. So that was one of the things that we did, and we did shoot at targets on the ground sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the only time we would have had. We missed out on that one, which I was sorry to.
Mm-hmm.
But they couldn't back up, get us retrained. So.
Right. Now, about how long did you stay in Boise then?
Well, that was probably another about 3 or 4 months there too.
Yeah. Was that the last stage of your training before you went overseas?
Yes.
Okay. So you
They
really.
sent us on a furlough again.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of furloughs. my Marine buddy never had one furlough in his whole lifetime there. But I had a lot of them.
Okay. So in total, you had about a year's worth of training?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, a little less than a year, because we were overseas in 1 year from the time I went into service.
All right. Now, of the different places that you trained, did you like any of them better than the others? Did you like being in Boise better than in Miami, or were they?
Well, I liked them all. It was interesting. I liked them all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tell me a little bit about the men in your crew. Where were they from? What kind of people were they?
Well, our engineer was a jitterbugger. he liked the jitter and dancing. The pilot and the co-pilot were very, very good buddies. I mean, they really were. They were just like brothers, almost. But the co-pilot wanted to be a fighter pilot. He didn't want to be a bomber. But of course, we went by height, and the tallest person got the upper turret, and then down, and then the smallest person got the ball turret. And the tail turret was also a small unit, so he was pretty small too.
All right. Now, what was your station on the plane?
I trained for the upper turret I was in the States, but I was transferred overseas to the nose turret.
Okay. And what happened to the guy who was supposed to be in the nose turret?
Well, he was the assistant engineer, and the engineer had to be on the flight deck, and so they just made a switch. And anyway, I was designated for the nose turret, and it was a beautiful view. I was out in front of everything.
All right. Now, had you ever been in an airplane before you were in the service?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. And when was the first time you got to go up in an airplane?
Well, that would have been, I guess it wasn't until Boise.
Okay. So did you go up get into the plane when you were in Nebraska? Did you pick up the plane in Nebraska?
No.
You just met the crew there?
we just picked up our crew in Nebraska.
All right. Okay. So you weren't scared to be up in the nose turret and looking down at the world below you?
No, not really.
All right. Okay. So now, once they've got you fully trained, now, were you going over there as part of a unit, or were you going to go off as replacements for units who were already overseas?
We were replacements. We went over on a Liberty ship and went into Naples and then a train all the way to our base.
Okay. Tell me about the sea voyage. Where did you sail out of?
Newport News.
Okay, sail out of Virginia. And what time of year was that? Was that November, December?
That would have been in the fall of 43.
Or 44 by then?
Yeah, 44, excuse me.
Okay, fall of 44. All right. And what was the trip like?
Well, it was in the convoy, and it was interesting to see. You had to have a life preserver on at all times, and it was the first day out was very rough, and we were lined up to get food, and all of a sudden the ship just tipped sideways, and the whole line went all the way and fell down, and our assistant engineer, he got a broken rib. He almost fell in the GI can, and all the people would take their chow and go on deck, and if the wave just hit it just right, they ran towards the railing and their food went with them. So that was a very rough day. Otherwise, it was quite calm.
Okay.
And of course, you was worrying about submarines constantly. And
did you encounter any that you know of, or?
no, we never encountered any.
Because by then there weren't too many U-boats left. There were
Yeah.
still some,
You
but
could
not
see-
too many. Could you see any of the escort ships?
Yeah, it was a big convoy.
Okay.
It was, but the Navy had their smaller boats
Mm-hmm.
zigzagging all over,
Right.
all over the place all the time.
Okay. Did you have an aircraft carrier with you?
No,
Okay, because they sometimes had small ones that went, but
just freight
Just-
boats and
destroyers, destroyer escorts, those things.
destroyer escorts. Yeah,
Okay. And about how long did it take to get to Italy?
took about a month.
Okay, so it's a slow convoy.
Yeah.
Did you stop any place along the way?
We stopped at Sicily, and some cargo was left taken off our boat, off some of the boats, and then we went to Italy from there.
Okay, went to Naples. All right. Now, what base did you go to then in Italy?
Well, we went to the 450th Bomb Group base, which was in the heel of Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and
Was there a
right near the Adriatic Sea.
okay? Now, was that at Foggia or was that a different place? Was there a town nearby?
Yeah, there was a very small town, Manchuria, I believe was the name of the
Or
town.
something like that, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what kind of reception did you get when you arrived on the base? What happened when you got there?
Well, the base was originally an Italian Air Force base.
Mhm.
And so we were in their bunk area. And some of the crews actually had built little small homes. The area around there was like sandstone, and they could actually saw stone squares out of that, and so a lot of the crews that were there a long time actually had their own home. But I was in a barracks, and they had two GI cans, gas cans, and 100 octane gasoline was dripping into that, and that was on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how our water was heated for showers and so forth. But one of the boys somehow was getting some hot water out and got, anyway, the flames and the gasoline he caught fire, and it had been rolled around the floor to get him out. But so it was pretty dangerous kind of a situation that they had there.
Okay. Now, did you have all of the same men with you that you had trained with?
No, the radio man and the tail gunner went AWOL before we went overseas, and so we had to pick up our radio man Rutenberg, and Walders was the gunner, the tail gunner.
And where did you get them? Or
They were overseas already.
okay, so they're assigned to your crew,
Yeah.
basically. Okay. Now, how long was it before you got up in the air after you got there?
Almost immediately. The first 5 missions had to have a veteran pilot, and our pilot flew co-pilot, and our co-pilot stayed on the ground. And so that's how we did our first 5 missions with a veteran pilot.
Okay.
And then after that, our pilot and co-pilot did the rest of it.
Okay. How many missions total did you fly?
Well, 8.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, if we went past a certain line, was counted as 2.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went to Vienna, we went to Vienna twice. That was counted as 2 missions.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to have 50 to go home.
Okay. Right. And then what kind of aircraft were you in?
I was in the B-24 4-engine bomber.
Right. Okay. Do you remember the first mission you flew?
The first mission was, it was in Germany, southern Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and big town. But the flak was so different than it was all exploding about 1,000 feet below us.
Mm-hmm.
We were throwing tinfoil out like Christmas tree tinfoil,
Mm-hmm.
and each bundle was representing a bomber, and so every group was throwing this out, and so layers of this tinfoil was floating down, and so this was all the flak was going. Bursting about 1,000 feet below, and I thought,
Mm-hmm.
we got it made, they can't hit us. That's the last time it ever happened. That
Mm-hmm.
we always threw the tinfoil out, but it never worked anymore except that one town. That was the only time we bombed Germany.
Mm-hmm. Where else did you go?
One time we hit the side of a mountain to cause an avalanche over a railroad track, and then there was a bridge. Germany still had half of Italy, the northern half of Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a very well constructed railroad bridge that they had previously tried to bomb and hadn't done.
Mm-hmm.
So they put 3,000 pound bombs in the bomb bays instead of 500 pound
Mm-hmm.
bombs. And this is when we still had our veteran pilot, and this was his last mission before he goes home. And anyway, we couldn't keep up with the formation, so we dropped one bomb in the sea. And we still couldn't keep up, so we dropped the other 2 bombs in the sea. And we weren't about to go over the target because it was a very well defended target, because the Germans, it was their supply line. And so we peeled off, and half the bomb group peeled off with us. And so then we were ordered to recircle up, and we started over the target, and there was a bomb group below us, so we circled around again, because we were all flying at different altitudes, so they had to readjust their guns. And then we started over again, and the bomb group above us said, "Get the hell out of there, or we're going to drop our bombs on you." So we all went home and dropped our bombs in the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those bombs would have put a person through college without any trouble at all. And another one, the first one to Vienna, we hit cloud cover. And we had a radar ship way over to, I could just barely see it. It was a silver rather than OD color. Mm-hmm. And we were told to bomb, we were going to bomb by radar. And it was my job to yell bombs away, because the bombardier didn't have there was no sight, bomb sight in our planes. The only ones that had bomb sight was lead and alternate lead, and then the radar plane. And anyway, the sky got full of bombs. I said, bombs away, and that radar plane never did drop its bombs. And some bombardier was getting flak in his bomb bays, and he dropped his bombs, and they were all dropped on him. So I was wondering how we were winning the war.
Mm-hmm.
And another flight, these were all messed up, and it was always the same group leader
Mm-hmm.
that was, and we were bombing Albania across the Adriatic Sea, and the British had the Germans on retreat out of Greece, and we were supposed to bomb the bridges to keep so they couldn't retreat over
Right.
with all their equipment. And so we come to this little town by about as big as what Galesburg is down here, and there was a beautiful bridge, and we were flying low altitude, and we blew the hell out of that town, and we missed the bridge completely. So those are some of the missions. The one that we were shot down at on our 8th mission was very good. I mean, everything went just perfect, and we didn't get shot at until after we left our target. And we kind of they go evasive action, like, so the gunners have a hard time tracking it, and we move right into a bunch of flak, and we don't know what happened. We never knew where we got hit. We lost an engine immediately, and about every 8 minutes, another one would go out, then another one would go out, and finally we had number 3 was the only one going, and it caught fire, and we were dropped from 25,000 feet to 1,500 feet, and bailed out in Hungary, and the bombardier and I and the engineer were standing on the flight deck. I mean, not the flight deck, the catwalk. And we were backed up to the pilot's compartment, and we were waiting for the pilots to give us the order to bail out. And finally it come, and by then you could see the individual leaves on the trees almost. It was getting pretty low. And anyway, I thought the engineer was going to go first because he was in front of me, but the bombardier pushed me. And I had hold of my shroud line handle. And I remember as I hit the slip screen, the wind from it just laid me on my back, and it was just very calm and peaceful, but windy. And then I decided I better pull my ripcord, and I looked down and it was already pulled in my hand. Where's my chute? It hadn't blossomed out yet, and so anyway, I once it blossomed out, I turned the chute, which is about the only training we had about parachuting. And I looked to see whether I was alone or had company, and I did see some chutes. So then I turned the way I was facing, which is also what they told us. You always want to fall forward. And then I looked at the ground, and I felt like a bullet. I mean, we come together mighty fast. But it happened to be a muddy, plowed field, and I immediately got up on my feet, and a gust of wind come along, and I couldn't run in that mud fast enough, so I was dragged in the mud for 100 feet, and I spilled my chute while I was still on my belly, because I still had a hold of those shroud lines, and got up, looked around, and I saw the engineer and the bombardier not too far from me, and then I got my Mae West and harness off. Then I looked around, and way in the distance was about 15 persons coming, and they all looked like they had long sticks, which were rifles. And so I just walked over with where the bombardier was, who had sprained a ligament in his leg. That was the main injury of anybody, except for the co-pilot didn't pull his ripcord, and of course he was dead. But we just waited for him, and as we didn't know we were in Hungary. We were trying to get to Yugoslavia because there was bipartisan people there that could help you
Right.
get back to your base.
Right. What had your target been that day? Where had you flown to?
Vienna.
Okay.
We were bombing Vienna, railroad yards. That was one of our main targets, is to keep oil from coming out of Romania,
Right.
Polesti area. And
when was this that you were shot down?
that was December 11th of 44.
Okay.
1 year from the date I went in.
Right. All right. So you're out there. So there's basically 3 of you from your crew who were together in that field.
Right.
All right. And these people come forward. Okay. Then what happens?
Well, as they come forward, they aren't Germans. What are they? We knew what German uniforms were. And the officer had a feather in his hat. And anyway, it turned out they were Hungarian soldiers. And they took us to a barn, and we just sat down, and occasionally they'd bring in more of the crew. And finally, all the crew but the pilot and co-pilot were, we were all there except them. And we didn't have we didn't have a navigator that day. The navigator was having ear problems, so he went to a hospital on that. So we were kind of lost because we didn't have anyways, they took us into this barn, and eventually, after several hours, we saw the pilot go past the door. And eventually he joined us, and we said, "Where's Wade?" which was the co-pilot's name, and he said, "He's dead." And he didn't tell us how or anything for 3 or 4 days, but he said he was dead. And then eventually we got, they put us in the back of a German truck, and we waited there for a long time and then a German soldier climbed into the back, and he says, "Anybody got a Chesterfield?" And he was born in Chicago and moved back to Germany just before the war started, and so he was schooled in America. And then they took us to a Hungarian Air Force base and put us in a cell, and we had a guard walking back and forth. We had a little door we could open in the middle of the door, and if we had to go to the bathroom, we had to yell to the guard, and he would get another guard to take us to the bathroom.
Right.
And but this was an indoor privy, and believe it or not, you had a squad over the hole, and it was this thick around the hole. I mean, it was a mess. And
at this point, had they taken things from you? I mean, did anyone
they
take watches or anything else?
All of that stuff. And I always liked frozen candy bars, and I always carried one of those in my knee pocket. And of course, they got my frozen candy bar, and they got our 40 pistols that we carried, 45 pistols. And but when they fed us, they brought us a bowl of all carrot soup or caraway soup or cabbage soup. It was nothing mixed, just that, and a spoon each. One bowl and a spoon each. And that was how we ate our meals. And we were there a couple days, and then eventually they started taking one out of our cell and went to interrogation. We didn't know what was going on until it was my turn. But anyway, there was a German officer up there that was interrogating us and telling us that we were spies and that according to the Geneva Convention, they could shoot us if we were spies. And then after that interview, we went down to another cell, and where everybody was everybody had gone, and there was a Russian flyer in there with us, and they'd always make us strip down, you know, so that we had nothing that could do them harm. But the Russian flyer had tall rubber boots, and he had a pistol in there, and he indicated there was going to be some dead Germans before he was through. And he was very smart. He drew a picture of the United States on the wall, and he knew where all the big cities were: Detroit, Chicago, and New York, and Los Angeles. And he also drew a picture of a Lightning, the fighter plane Lightning, and he wanted to fly a Lightning. He was in love. He'd seen one in the air, and he thought that was great. But anyway, we were soon we were taken out of there, and we were there just about 3 days. But the night before we were to go, some of the guards come in our cell, and we taught them how to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy. and when we got up in the morning, they didn't even lock the door. We didn't know we could have escaped from there but we didn't. And they also said they hated the Germans, but they hated the Russians more. And the Russians happened to have half of Hungary at the time we went down, and if we'd gone 40 miles farther, we would have went over their front line.
Right, which explains in part why there would be a Russian flyer there too, because he would have been flying support for their combat units or something. Because normally American prisoners didn't run into Russian ones very often.
No, we didn't. He left it at that point. We went back to our old cell. We didn't see him after that.
Right.
But
okay. But so you're there. You're there in Hungary there for just a few days.
Well, from there we went to Potts, Hungary, and was in a hotel-like room, and we had a German sergeant that was kind of in charge, and he interrogated us too, and made us strip down, and they always our radio man in Rutenberg was Jewish, and anytime the toilets had to be cleaned, Rutenberg had to do it, so that was kind of a little bit of you could see the resentment that Germans had for Jews. We were there probably 3 or 4 days, and then we picked up two guards that were old enough to be from World War I, and we were marched down the street, and we stood in the front of a brick wall, and for hours we didn't know why we were in front of this brick wall, but I thought, my mind says, are they going to shoot us in front of this wall? But they were trying to hitchhike a ride on a German truck going the way they wanted us to go. And eventually we did get a ride, and we rode for quite a few miles. And then we got into Vienna again, but we had to get into a freight car before that. And the guard, he couldn't climb in the freight car with it and hold his rifle at the same time, and he handed it to our engineer. But the other guard had a burp gun, and so that cocked immediately, and so that nothing happened there. But we rode into Vienna on the boxcar, and then they took us to a big, huge gym-like room, and pictures of Goring and Hitler and all the big shots were on the wall, and all the Germans that come in the room hailed Hitler, and there was a bar there for him. And we were there just a short time. Then they took us to a restaurant that had all German Gestapo and everybody in there, SS, and we had a bowl of some kind of black soup, and then eventually they took us back to the gym light room at closing time, just in time for them, the guards, to get a couple bottles of beer, and the guards got one bottle of beer for us, and we had to pass it under the table. And we slept at that table folded, sitting there with our head on the table. So that was our first night with the guards. And then we picked up a passenger train out of Vienna, and the trains there are all compartment-like, and the guards just went into one room and says, "Roust, roust," and everybody out of that, and we moved in, and it was just here. It was just before Christmas time, and we were singing Christmas carols, and the Germans were singing Silent Night in German, and we were singing in English, but the train was so hot that I got so thirsty. It was like you want to almost die because you're so thirsty, and all that singing and all that. So anyway, the guard had a canteen, but it was empty, and I got it somehow, and I opened a window. We got into a station. I opened a window, and I held it out, the canteen out the window, and it says Wasser, 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 which is water, and somebody come along and picked it up and brought me a can of gas. I guess they didn't know I was a prisoner of war, but anyway, so I got my water, and then they took us. We stopped, and they took us into a Gestapo station, and the guards wanted a day off, so they put us in this station, and the Germans had given us, when we first left, a hunk of bread, a heavy bread, and a hunk of sausage, and there was French forced labor in this Gestapo, and they were like skin and bone, and they were begging us for the rind off of our sausage, in which we give it to them. But then the Gestapo caught them doing that, and they beat the heck out of those Frenchmen, but they never did anything to us. And then we finally got into our interrogation camp area, which was on the main river. Oh boy, I can't think of the name of it right now. There's
That's
something
okay.
on the main.
Okay.
Anyway, this was a big room, big building, and all the flyers, English, Canadian, everybody but Russian, come to this interrogation camp. And first they give us a shower, and then they started they wanted to know what my mess sergeant's name was, and which I didn't know anyway, but we were only had to give our name, rank, and serial number, and that's all they got out of me. And then they give me a number on a piece of paper, and told me to walk down the hall, and guards were every 25, 30 feet, and looked at my number, and finally they took my number and opened up a little door, and we were in a solitary confinement. This room was probably 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, with a little window, and every night they took our shoes out away from us, and I was there for probably 3 days, and I guess they decided they weren't going to get any more out of me, so then they put us in a big room, and they with a whole mess of other GI flyers, and they fed us a meal that I would have sworn was cream tree leaves, and then they took us to a transit
Before we go on that far, when they were interrogating you at this place, did they make much of an effort to get you to talk? Did they tell you a lot of things about your unit or where you came from, or?
Well, they did say some of that, yes. But one of our assistant engineer, had worked for Delco Remy, and they knew it. And so I assume that they got big town papers from, and when John Jones come and visit Grandma at a certain town, they clipped it all out. And if John Jones happened to walk through that place, they had him. You know, when they give you the impression they already knew all about you, so what you said didn't hurt you any, but it would help them. And so this is the way they did. They were pretty smart. I mean.
Now, on the whole, did they physically treat you well? I mean, did they beat or hit any of the American prisoners, or just the
They didn't
laborers?
beat us or anything like that. Only the one person that threatened to kill us because we were spies was the only. But no time did they beat us.
Right. Okay. So we go back to your story here. You say you've finished with the interrogation process. Right. And then they move you to a transit point?
Yes, and this camp was designed just to all these flyers, and they were moved out to various places almost immediately. But at the time of the war, we were close to the Battle of the Bulge, and we could hear the guns, big guns going off all the time. And this camp was very nice. We had springs in our bed, we had flush toilets, and we had a nice dining hall, and the German food was mixed with British Red Cross parcels, and so we had cocoa and salmon flavored mashed potatoes, which is really good. And all around the walls was life-size pictures that some American artists, the Germans let them draw these pictures. Anyway, there was Snuffy Smith with a shotgun out of a ball turret. There was Wimpy, the comic Wimpy.
Like from Popeye, or? Yeah.
Dreaming, seeing a cow, dreaming about this hamburger on the other side of the fence. And there was a Negro fighter pilot in a dive that was yelling, "Whoa, boss, whoa, boss," and there was a whack POW. And at this camp, they give us a suitcase with pajamas and toothpaste and lots of little goodies like that. Anyway, she was holding up a bra that was 3 sizes smaller than she was, but there was just cute things like that. And if you went to the doctor, right outside of his office, there's a picture of a GI with a cut finger dreaming of a Purple Heart, but that was just very interesting. And while we were there, also they showed the Olympics that was in Germany, in Britain and Germany before the war started, and Jesse Owens was raising that flag up many times, and that was rather interesting. We also had a good library, and they had a Protestant and a British father that were paratroopers for the British units. And anyway, the Protestant, he was kind of a grumpy old man, but the British Catholic, he could not talk. He sang everything. Everything he wanted to say, he sang. And that was so interesting to hear that. And he would sit on the edge of our bed or something and talk to us or sing to us. And that was quite interesting.
How long did you stay there?
Well, we were supposed to move out almost immediately. And the officers had a berth, which was on the Baltic Sea, was the officers' camp. And we could volunteer to go to the officers' camp if we wanted to wait on our officers. But with those big guns going all the time, and we knew Patton wasn't very far away, 3 of us decided to stay back of our crew. The Baltort guy and the radio man, Rutenberg, and myself. And but the camp getting so full. See, most of the at this time of the war, the Russians had already run into Poland, where there was also a lot of Air Force Luft camps. That's what they called the Flyers camp. Right. And so there wasn't hardly any place to put us, and they said we were going to go to Barth whether we wanted to or not. So they put us in a boxcar. There was about 40 of us, British and American flyers, in half of the boxcar, and 2 guards in the other half, and a pot-belly stove in the middle. And it was so cold out, the bolts were all frosty white, and every time there was an air raid and we were parked, the guards locked the doors and ran in a ditch or something. And that was our biggest problem, because anything that was rolling on a track, they were targets. And so we were kind of worried that way. In fact, going back to the transit camp, we had an air raid, and we were on a hill, and this train track was down in the valley, and 2 P-57s were dive bombing and rocketing this train, and we had a place to go where we would be safe from a air raid, but I was in a window watching. I couldn't leave that window watching them planes dive on that. So that helped me think that this could happen to our train. But they give us a Canadian Red Cross parcel that was supposed to last us 4 days. And we got into Berlin. It took 4 days to get to Berlin. And we were there 4 days, and we were out of food. And in fact, we were there a total of 8 days in that boxcar. And every night, mosquito bombers come over and bomb Berlin. And so that was kind of scary. But it was only 1 or 2 planes. It wasn't any. The mosquito bomber, I don't know if you know, that was a wooden plane made in Canada. 2-engine.
It was very fast, but it didn't carry a lot of bombs.
Right. And anyway, the German Red Cross come down the track with a soup kettle to give us 1 meal. And that was the only other meal we got. And eventually they changed our orders, and we went south of Berlin, 30 miles, and to a ground force camp, not an Air Force camp. And but somebody come down with scarlet fever in this, and so we were quarantined for 2 weeks before we were mixed with the ground force. And I remember getting boiled potatoes and some of them were actually rocks. I mean, they boiled the rocks in the potatoes, and while we were there, the day after we left Berlin, the 8th Air Force hit Berlin with over 1,000 planes out of England, and so we were lucky to get out of there. And eventually, we went with the ground forces, and most of them that were in our barracks were captured in Africa. So they'd been prisoners a long time, and most of them had worked on farms, but as they had to move because of the Russians coming towards where they were in Poland or various places like that. And our food rations while we were there was, in the morning we had a cup of Urset's tea, which was artificial tea.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it was made of acorns, but we didn't know for sure. And and then for lunch we had a hunk of heavy bread about like that, about 3 inches, and a cup of pea soup.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while you see a string of meat in there. And for supper we had Urset's tea again. That was what the Germans fed us. And the Urset's tea was very good for shaving, because that was hot. Otherwise it didn't get drunk. We didn't drink much of it. And the whole barracks had what they call a chow king, and it was his job to divide all the food up evenly. The bread would come, they'd bring a door, have a regular door full of, stacked with bread, and it was his job to and the bunk I had was 5 high, and I was in the top bunk, and every night it had slats in it with a straw mattress on top. Excuse me.
At this point here, this tape is about out. All right. We were talking about life in the prison camp, but you said you remembered where it was that the transit camp was. So what town was that in?
Frankfurt on the Main, which is a big town.
Big city, still is, yeah.
Yeah.
And now, do you know the name of the stalag where you were, the prison camp you were in, or just that it was a regular army one? Was there a town or a number? Or?
It was like Luckenwald, but Luckenwald was, I think, is where it was 30 miles south of Berlin. That's,
okay. All right.
But I don't think it was Luckenwald, but I think that's where the Jewish camps were.
Well, there was a camp called Buchenwald, but that was, Buchenwald was farther west. That was in what's now West Germany.
Yeah.
But it may have had a vault in it somewhere. Okay. All right. Anyway, you were talking about the physical, the living conditions in your barracks. You were talking about being in the top bunk.
Yeah, well, every day I had those slats were kept. Apparently, they'd used some of the slats for firewood, and anyway, I spaced them all out. And in the morning, my rear end was right down on top of the guy it was underneath me, because the bunks were quite close together. And this amount of food that we were getting, of course, we were getting pretty thin, and that lasted for about a month and a half.
When did you arrive there?
Well, let's see. It was, I think, January when we were in that boxcar.
Okay.
It was. I'm pretty sure it was in January. So,
right.
And it took us 8 days to get there.
Right.
So.
Okay. So you said first month or so, food is pretty bad.
Yes, and then we started getting. Gradually, we get one American Red Cross parcel for 4 people, then one for 2, and then we got one in each week. We got one for each individual, and then we were eating quite well. That in that parcel was 2 packs of cigarettes. There was sugar. There was flour. There was what they call a 10-in-1 cereal. Different ways to make it. Eat it raw or cook it or whatever you want to do with it. And then there was cheese and prunes or raisins and jam. And so we ate pretty good after that. And
did you have any idea why things were changing?
Well, apparently they didn't have any Red Cross parcels when we first got there. I don't know why, but
well, those were coming all along.
Yeah,
it was a question of whether or not the Germans were giving.
Well,
it to
the
you.
transportation system was pretty bad at this time. I mean, we kept bombing these railroads, and that makes it pretty bad on the. Anyway, we decided we want one of the boys. There was a clique of 3 of us, and Rutenberg was one of them. our ball turret gunner, he was sick. He didn't come with us,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was another regular GI that had been in the Air Force, and while I was just at the time I was going to gunnery school, 30,000 were transferred from the Air Force to and he was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they made a regular division almost out of those 30,000.
Yep.
And they were in the Battle of the Bulge, and they got whipped pretty bad because that was their first battle.
Right.
They weren't.
That's probably the 106th Division, which was
Yeah.
the one that got surrounded. Yeah.
And he was telling us about they were held up in a apartment like, and there was two apartments, and the Germans had it surrounded, and so they waved a white flag, and out of both of the apartments, and then so they surrendered, but somebody shot at the Germans after the white flag was out, and the Germans out of that one apartment mowed down everybody in that apartment, and they left his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
They let it go. So that was his experiences, and but anyway, we had a Russian compound on one side of us,
Mm-hmm. British
compound on the other side, and every morning we had BBC News come out of the British compound. They had a hidden radio,
Mm-hmm.
and so we knew how the war was coming all the time, when the Russians were advancing and
Mm-hmm.
when the Americans and the British were advancing. And on the other side of it was the Russians, and we had little cookers. Somebody was very good at tinsmithing, and they'd take our coffee can that come in a Red Cross parcel and make a little crank, and we get wood from the Russians by paying them a couple cigarettes, and we'd cook
Mm-hmm.
some of the ingredients out of the Red Cross parcel, and so that was made it interesting. But the Russians, they were beating them all the time. They had a really rough time of it. And so that was and later on, the Air Force, 8th Air Force, come over Berlin again. In that 30 miles, we could see when a plane got a direct hit where it blew up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And the war was gradually coming to an end, and one day I looked up, and here's B-24s scattered all over the sky, and I thought, that's got to be the 15th,
Mm-hmm.
and it was. My buddy was up in that plane, one of those planes. They had put gas tanks in the bomb bay, so they couldn't carry very many bombs.
Mm-hmm.
It was only a matter of 3 or 4 days before the war was over, and German jets had hit them before they got to Berlin. And of course, the jets just tore. That was one of our fears when we were flying. If the German jets got us, I never fired my guns once. I never seen an enemy plane in the air. They were reported. Normally they would hit one squadron and leave the rest of them alone, and they just riddled the one squadron. And so that was kind of interesting to see that happen. And all of a sudden, our guards are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they gone? They're all on the perimeter of the camp, and we had the camp to ourselves. And that night we went to bed, and the next morning, the Russians are here, and the whole convoy come right through the camp, all in GM trucks, the ones that I probably was working on.
Right.
And the officer gave a big speech, which I couldn't understand, and tanks had run through the fence, had lots of holes in it. And they picked our barracks to do guard duty. And so they put us in the guard where the German guards' quarters were, and they wanted me to wear a white armband, and I was to be on the perimeter of the camp, and our orders were not to let anybody go out or come in, but all night long was machine guns going off and cannons going off, and then I was laying in a hole with no white armband on. And then I had 8 hours off, which I slept. Then the next day was a daylight time, and the officer of the day took a bunch of us, and we walked the perimeter of the outside perimeter of the camp, and every time we come to a hole, he'd drop a guard off to keep people from going in and out. And so I got to the area where the Yugoslav prisoners were, and anyway, I had a big hole in the fence, and I was standing there, and they were coming back with bicycles and beer and everything, and they just pushed me aside and went in, and I didn't care. It was none of my business whether they went in or out, and so pretty soon, after 3 or 4 groups had gone through, the officer of the day come walking by and walked right by me and made that turn like that and out of sight. But he passed 3 guys coming towards me. And immediately he turned about face, come back. Where'd they go? I said, through here. And he got red in the face, and he looked around and he saw a 2x4 about 8 foot long with spikes in it. He popped that in front of me. He says, don't you let anybody else go through. And nobody got through after that, but there was a hole down the way that didn't have it go through that one. And so that was my end of my guard duty there.
Yeah. How long did you have to stay in the camp after the Germans left?
Quite a while. It was several weeks. The Russians were feeding us pea soup like the Germans did, and but we had more meat in the soup. And but we hadn't known there was even officers in our camp until the Germans left, and we had a colonel in charge of our barracks and 2 lieutenants, and we had roll call just like the Germans did every morning, and here again told we couldn't leave camp, we'd stay right here. And then they had heard about a German officers camp, and so they decided our barracks was going to go over there and make room for the rest of the Americans to come over until the war was over. And so we packed up all our gear and walked that 6 miles through the fields, and mostly through the fields, and we got to this beautiful camp. I mean, all brick buildings and springs in the beds and pink painted walls and warehouses full of tools and cameras, but the cameras were all busted. Somebody busted them all up. And then we went on guard duty because the French forced labor had moved into this camp, and we were told they couldn't take their bedding. So 2 of us were on guard in front of this big barracks, and eventually they tried to take their barracks. We'd shoot them back. Pretty soon they were picking up clubs, and we had no guns or anything to. But just as it started getting pretty rough, my relief come, and I don't know what happened after that, but somewhere down the line at another barracks, the Frenchman hit a GI over the head with a pistol, And so our officer says, maybe we better go back to where we were. And so they said the next morning, in the morning, we're going to leave. And that night, we were on the second floor, and that night there was a big battle right down in the street. The Russians had caught a pocket of Germans, and all night long there was just guns going off. And the next day we walked back to our barracks, and we crossed the same fields we'd crossed. We were stepping over bodies. There had been a battle in between that 18-hour or 24-hour or whatever it was that we were there at the barracks, and that was kind of scary. I mean, because we would, but we got back to our barracks, and pretty soon, Lieutenant, where's the colonel? Oh, he's around somewhere. He's around somewhere. And pretty soon, the lieutenants they'd all gone to town and stolen a car and gone back to. We were 40 miles from the American lines. They were on the other side of the Elbe River, and so we decided we were going to go too. And so we left the compound, and we got a couple miles out of the camp, and a jeep come up with a lieutenant in it, and he says, go back to the barracks, we're going to have a convoy there tomorrow. So why walk 40 miles if you can get a ride? So we walked back to the barracks, and it didn't come that day. The next day it did come. But then the Russians wouldn't let us load. They argued, I think they wanted so much ahead for what they'd done for us. And I don't know that for a fact, but anyway, they wouldn't let us. They eventually took sick pay, and that was it. And so the next day we decided we were going to escape from the Russians, and so we took off, and we stuck to the fields mostly for miles and miles. The three of us that were in that clique. But as we looked back around at more and more, all nationalities were following us. And by the time we hit the road, to the Elbe River, we had a convoy was coming up the road, American convoy, and we had enough to fill one truck. And so it was a black American truck driver. Anyway, he was told to stay there, and the convoy will pick him up on the way back. And he went try to do some hunting, the deer hunting. The deer are like only 3 or 4 feet tall. I mean, very short, small deer over there. But he didn't get anything. But we were sat there for 3 or 4 hours. Finally, a jeep come up and he says, "Get back to camp. Get back to the American lines right now." And we got over the line, and no sooner got over, but the Russians closed that bridge down. This was a pontoon bridge that the Americans had made because the main bridge had been bombed out, and everybody else that was coming, trying to get over that Elbe River, had to leave their trucks on the Russian side and walk over this half-submerged bridge that had been bombed out. So we were having big troubles with the Russians already. And then when we got back there was everything. We got a little bit of a physical, but not much. And a few days later, they had us on a train going to Camp Lucky Strike in France. And while we were there, we saw the rest of our crew. We managed to get together. Everybody was doing okay, and Eisenhower there was an airstrip there, and Eisenhower landed there and gave us a talk while we were there, and then we were sent, put on a boat to go back to America. And
What kind of boat did they put you on to go back?
it wasn't a Liberty. It was more of a liner
Okay.
type of boat. I'm not sure what kind it was, but I think it was Newport News we landed in. Again, we didn't go to New York like some of the boats did.
Was that a faster trip going back?
Yeah, it's much faster because we didn't have convoy or
Right.
anything else.
Right.
I know some paratrooper was gambling, and he ran out of money, and he talked me into loaning him some money. I don't know where I got the money from. I guess they must have paid me something, and but I never got my money back. But
Okay.
that was the end of my military.
Okay. Well, then what happened to you? You got back to the States.
Well, they sent us home immediately. They had a 60-day furlough, and but it bothered me that we didn't get a good physical. I mean, because some of those guys were, and myself had a problem. I didn't know I had a problem, but and out of that 60 days, I spent 30 days at Boy Scout camp because I was a Boy Scout before, and I still am. I'm still in the Boy Scouts. And so I just put my uniform on at retreat at the end of the day when the flag lowering, and that's the only time I wore my uniform. But
So.
and then then after 60 days, they sent us back to Miami Beach. And we were on hospital rations and 1.5, and the fellas that were married could take their wife down there, and I wasn't married at the time, and we had a good physical down there, and on the board at our barrack or our hotel that we were at, I saw that I was supposed to go back to the medical place, and I did, and they didn't know why I was supposed to be there. So they had found this spot on my lung, but somehow they lost all and so I didn't. We were after Miami. After we were down there for a couple of weeks, and there was Ernie Pyle's restaurant that everything was free for the GIs, that we could just go there and get hamburgers and whatever we wanted, and shakes, and then we were sent to Laredo, Texas, and waiting to be discharged, and we were put in to treat machine guns with so that they could be stored and not rust. But here we are. At the time, they give us our rank that we were supposed to have, because every 5 missions we went up another rank. I started as a private, and then at 5 missions I was a corporal, and I hadn't got 10 yet, so I was still, when I was a prisoner, I was a corporal. But they give us our rank that we were supposed to, because they knew we were going to be, the war was going to, where they're going to send us home, and they didn't have to pay us much. But anyway, I was a staff sergeant. That was the top rank I could get, and so this corporal knew what to do, and we had, and everybody else was sergeants above him, and so the corporal he knew everything of what to do. And one day an officer come down with a shotgun that needed repairs, and the corporal knew how to do it, and so he repaired it, and this was a mess sergeant, officer mess sergeant. No, not a sergeant, but an officer in the mess hall. Anyway, he says, when he got his gun back, he says, come back to the mess hall and go into a certain corner. And so we all went into this corner, and they give us filet mignon steak, big thick thing, the best steak I ever had. And so that was, and then after that we went had our physical to be discharged, and I didn't pass it.
What did they think was wrong with you?
Well, they found a spot on my lung, and anyway, I was there in Laredo for another 2 or 3 weeks, and they flew me up to Denver, and there I was in bed for a while, and finally the doctor come out and says, you can get up and go around wherever you want to go, and so I had the freedom of doing it. We were on the second floor, and the floor I was on, they weren't very sick, but on the floor below us, they were very sick, and in fact, several of them died with tuberculosis, and then my buddy next to me was a Japanese prisoner, and but he had it pretty rough, a lot rougher than I had.
So was he, like a Japanese who had been in the Japanese army and been captured?
Yeah.
And came here? Okay. Yeah. All right. So how long did you have to stay in Denver then?
I was there, well, let's see, I got back on Memorial Day I got home on just a couple of days before Memorial Day of 46.
Okay. So it's rather a while. All right. Now, did the disease...
I was there quite a while.
Now, did they treat you for tuberculosis or just keep an eye on you? Or
Well, I had every year the government would send me a form to go get an X-ray, and paid for it, and it eventually disappeared. So so I haven't had an X-ray for a long time now, from the government anyway.
Okay. Now, I don't know, how did your family feel about it, that you were still stuck in the Army all this time and couldn't come home? Were you writing back and forth, or were you in communication with people back home, or could you go home?
You mean when I was in prison camp?
No, actually after you were out of prison camp, but you're still in the Army, and they keep you in because you're sick.
I was corresponding, but we did have we had Germans give us some notes that we could write a letter to, but my mother never got them until after I was already home.
Had they been informed by the U.S. government or what had happened to you, or?
Well, they knew I was missing in action.
Okay.
And they let everybody know, the crew's parents could communicate with each other to see who had what information and so forth. But my mother said she knew the day I jumped out of that airplane. She knew something was wrong right then.
But did she think you were still alive and just stayed hopeful, or?
Well, I'm not sure how she knew about that, but she must have had that feeling that I was still alive.
Yeah. All right. Now you get to May of 46. You finally get to go home. What did you do after you got back?
What did I do after I got back? Well, I went on the staff of Boy Scout camp for that summer, and then I wanted to do some college work, and I didn't have the credits that I hadn't taken. I'd taken a vocational course in high school, and so I needed some credits. So I went back to high school for 6 months, and but it turned out that what I took in college didn't need those credits. I went to. I was considered a disabled veteran because of this, and I went to talk to them about this disabled and my career, what I wanted to do. I'd like to have gotten into forestry
Mm-hmm.
because I like to be outside. And they told me that the foresters, you never hardly move up in rank because you had to wait for somebody to die before
Mm-hmm.
you could move up. They also said because we were late getting out, the normal time would have been a year before,
Mm-hmm.
and the college. He said the colleges are just full of foresters, and he recommended this course in nursery and landscape management,
Mm-hmm.
which was not a degree course. It was
Right.
a 2-year training course.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, my mother always said I should be a gardener,
Mm-hmm.
and so I went up and talked to him and decided that's what I might want to do, and before I started college, I got married,
Mm-hmm.
and anyway that turned out to be very good for me. I enjoyed. And what it basically was 6 months at college, 6 months on placement training,
Mm-hmm.
6 months at college, and 6 months on placement training.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my placement training in Richland, Michigan, for a light tree company,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually left them and went on my own.
And so then you had your own business then
Right.
as your career. Okay. Now, when you look back at the time that you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you or changed you, or what did you learn from it?
Well, I enjoyed the service. I went into the idea that I'm going to have to be there until the war is over, and so I made the best of it I
Mm-hmm.
could. I was, well, first of all, I was not a smoker and I was not a drinker.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to pick the company that I was with because most of them were smokers and drinkers, and I was sure glad I didn't smoke when I got over in prison camp, because I saw people scraping tobacco off the floor that had been walked over and getting enough to make a little, and toilet paper to take a few drags off of it. And my Rutenberg, in the middle of the winter, sold his heavy sweater to a guard for a pouch of tobacco and a few papers to make cigarettes. And I could see that smoking was not for me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, when you would get cigarettes in your Red Cross packages, would you then trade them with other people to get other stuff?
Well, cigarettes become money.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go buy a can of cheese for 15 cigarettes, or so I could get more rations than what I normally would get,
Right.
because of the people that smoked would rather smoke than eat, most of the cases. And so it was, and I was saving. I had the time the war was over. I had about. I thought I'd need some cigarettes for bargaining to get out, out of there, but I didn't need them. It turned out that I had about 5 packs of cigarettes stored up.
All right. What else do you think you kind of got out of the time in the service, or in what way were you different when you came out than when you went in?
Well, I certainly was more of a man. But I later on in life I found out that I was dyslexic. I didn't know until about 40 years when I was 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I saw on TV this program on dyslexic, and everything was like me. My left and right.
Mm-hmm.
I always had trouble with left and right, and every time I do plumbing, I get all screwed up, and and my spelling is terrible, so everything I saw in it, that's me, everything, and there's a lot of people that were dyslexic, made it big in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, George S. Patton.
One of the Rockefellers.
Mm-hmm.
I read in a book the other day that Patton
Yeah.
was dyslexic.
Yeah, he was.
And so, but that has always been a problem with me. I married, the lady I married, who I still love very much, was a student. So she did all my book work, and even when I was going to college, I'd write out what I wanted, and she'd correct it and type it, and that's what I'd turn in.
Right.
And I probably wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for her, because my spelling is terrible.
Now, did you stay in touch with any of the guys you were in the service with, or ever go
Well,
to
the-
reunions?
My friend that was in that plane up above, went flying over me. His name was Dilliner, George Dilliner, who happened to be related to John Dilliner. But he was a farm boy in Illinois, and I've visited them quite often. But he's now passed away. And then there was another Dively. We were all because of our names were D's. We were all always in the same room or something like. But anyway, he was from Pontiac, Illinois, and I hadn't seen him. Well, I saw him in prison camp when I was in the transit camp, and we were on roll call. And I always marched behind him because he was a little taller. They always had but his ears stuck out like this. And I knew him right from behind that was Dively. And I didn't know where he wasn't in the same base. Our boat broke down when we were supposed to go in this convoy. His boat went. And so we didn't. We knew he was in Italy, but we didn't know where. And anyway, George was with me all the time, and he didn't take up smoking until I went down. And smoking was part of his problem, and what helped kill him. I mean, so.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add to the record here before we close out the interview? Or you think you've...
No, only that I think I've had a good life and very comfortable life, and I'm still very patriotic. And although some of the politics doesn't rub me wrong a little bit, and that's the only problem I have is with what's going on in politics. I think. This lobbying and all this kind of stuff that the politicians are filling their pockets to get reelected, and that's the most important thing. The most important thing is to get reelected, not to run the government.
Well, that's a complaint, I think, that probably crosses a lot of generations.
Yeah.
All right. So you've got a good story, and I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to tell it to me today.